Herr Georg Hegel's Philosophy of Mind, Encyclopedia subsection 406, supra subsection Gamma. But before we begin there, a summary of what has already come before. We are in the Georg Hegel Encyclopedia, the portion of it which is dedicated to the philosophy of mind. And within the philosophy of mind, we are in section 1, Mind Subjective. And we are at the Encyclopedia subsection 387, which in summary covered mind on the ideal stage of its development is mind as cognitive. And from there we hear subjective mind is A, immediate or implicit, B, mediate or explicit, and C, mind defining itself in itself as an independent subject, the object treated by psychology. Then we enter subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. This is subsection A of section 1, mind subjective, of the Encyclopedia section or book called Philosophy of Mind. It begins with Encyclopedia subsection 388, which is spirit, parentheses, mind, came into being as the truth of nature. Then Encyclopedia subsection 389, the soul is no separate immaterial entity. Then Encyclopedia subsection 390, the soul is at first A, in its immediate natural mode, B, it is a soul which feels, C, its immediate being or corporeity is molded in it or into it. Now again, within the Georg Hegel Encyclopedia, we're in the book Philosophy of Mind, section 1, Mind Subjective, subsection A, Anthropology, the soul, suprasection A, the physical soul, or natürliche Seele in German. We proceed to Encyclopedia subsection 391, the soul universal, described, it may be, as an anima mundi, a world soul, must not be fixed on that account as a single subject. Under Encyclopedia subsection 391, we have supersection alpha, physical qualities or natürliche Qualitäten, and then we lead into Encyclopedia subsection 392, while still a substance, in essence a physical soul, the mind, number 1, takes part in the general planetary life. Moving to Encyclopedia subsection 393, but still under supersection alpha, physical qualities or natürliche Qualitäten, we get to number 2, according to concrete differences of the terrestrial globe. So while still a substance, in essence a physical soul, the mind, 1, takes part in the general planetary life 2. According to concrete differences of the terrestrial globe. Moving on to Encyclopedia subsection 394, this diversity descends into specialties that may be termed local minds. And we find 3 under Encyclopedia subsection 395. 3. The soul is further de-universalized into the individualized subject. Then we move to supersection beta under subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Encyclopedia subsection 396. Taking the soul as an individual, we find its diversities as alterations into it, the one permanent subject, and as stages in its development. Then we move on to example 1. The first of these is the natural lapse of the ages in man's life. Moving on to Encyclopedia subsection 397, we find the second example. Next, we find the individual subject to a real antithesis, leading it to seek and find itself in another individual. Then Encyclopedia subsection 398. Number 3, when the individuality or self-centralized being distinguishes itself from its mere being, this immediate judgment is the waking of the soul, which confronts its self-absorbed natural life, in the first instance as one natural life, in the first instance as one natural quality, and state confronts another state, vis-a-vis or as in sleep. Then we move on to again subsection A, Anthropology, the soul. Suprasection Alpha, physical qualities or naturliche Qualitaten. Supersection Beta, the examples again. Taking the soul as an individual, we find its diversities as alternations in it, the one permanent subject, and as stages in its development. 1. The first of these is the natural lapse of the ages in man's life. 2. Next, we find the individual subject to a real antithesis, leading it to seek and find itself in another individual. 3. When the individuality or self-centralized being distinguishes itself from its mere being, this immediate judgment is the waking of the soul, which confronts its self-absorbed natural life, in the first instance as one natural life, in the first instance as one natural quality, and state confronts another state, vis-a-vis as in sleep. Moving on to supersection Gamma, sensibility or empfindung. Encyclopedia subsection 399. Sleep and waking are, it is true, not mere alterations, but alternating conditions, a progression in infinitum. Then Encyclopedia subsection 400. Sensibility, feeling, is the form of the dull stirring, the inarticulate breathing of the spirit through its unconscious and unintelligent individuality, where every definite feature is still immediate. Encyclopedia, subsection 401. What the sentient soul finds within it is, on one hand, the natural immediate as ideally in it and made its own. On the other hand, and conversely, what originally belongs to the central individuality gets the features of the natural corporality and is so felt. Encyclopedia, subsection 402. Sensations, just because they are immediate and are found existing, are single and transient aspects of the psychic life. Alternations in substantiality of the soul set it alternations of the substantiality of the soul set in its self-centered life, with which that substance is one. Subsection B. The feeling soul. Soul as sentience are die fühlende Seele in German. Encyclopedia, subsection 403. The feeling or sentient individual is the simple ideality or subjective side of sensation. Encyclopedia, subsection 404. As individual, the soul is exclusive and always exclusive. Any difference there is, it brings within itself. Encyclopedia, section 404, then moves on to supersection alpha and Encyclopedia subsection 405. Supra subsection alpha alpha. Though the sensitive individuality is undoubtedly a monadic individual, it is because immediate, not as yet itself, not a true subject reflected into itself, and is therefore passive. Encyclopedia, subsection 406, supra section beta beta. The sensitive life, when it becomes a form or state of the self-conscious, educated, self-possessed human being, is a disease. Encyclopedia, subsection 406, supra subsection alpha. To the concrete existence of the individual belongs the aggregate of his fundamental interests, both the essential and the particular empirical ties which connect him with other men and the world at large. Encyclopedia, subsection 406, supra subsection beta. Where a human being's senses and intellect are sound, he is fully and intelligently alive. To that reality of which gives concrete feelings, FILLING, to that reality of his which gives concrete feelings, to that reality of his which gives concrete feeling to his individuality. But he is awake to it in the form of interconnection between himself and the features of that reality, conceived as an external and a separate world, and he is aware that this world is in itself also a complex of interconnections of a practically intelligible kind. Once again, before moving on to today's section Gamma, Encyclopedia 406, subsection Alpha. To the concrete existence of the individual belongs the aggregate of his fundamental interests, both the essential and the particular empirical ties which connect him with other men and the world at large. Encyclopedia, section 406, subsection Beta, where a human being's senses and intellect are sound, he is fully and intelligently alive to that reality of his which gives concrete feeling to his individuality. But he is awake to it in the form of interconnection between himself and the features of that reality, conceived as an external and a separate world, and he is aware that this world is in itself also a complex of interconnections of a practically intelligent kind. Today's reading, Encyclopedia, subsection 406, subsection Gamma. But when all that occupies the waking consciousness, the world outside it, and its relationship to that world is under a veil, and the soul is thus sunk in sleep, in magnetic sleep, in catalepsy, and other diseases, ergo, those connected with female development or at the approach of death, and so on, like this, then that immanent actuality of the individual remains the same substantial total as before, but now as a purely sensitive life with an inward vision and an inward consciousness. And because it is the adult, formed, and developed consciousness which is degraded into this state of sensitivity, it retains along with its content a certain nominal selfhood, a formal vision and awareness, which, however, does not go so far as the conscious judgment or discernment by which its contents, when it is healthy and awake, exists for it as an outward objectivity. The individual is thus a monad which is inwardly aware of its actuality, a genius which beholds itself. The characteristic point in such knowledge is that the very same facts which for the healthy consciousness are an objective practical reality, and to know which, in its sober moods, it needs the intelligent chain of means and conditions in all their real expansion, are now immediately known and perceived in this eminence. This perception is a sort of clairvoyance, for it is a consciousness living in the undivided substantiality of the genius and finding itself in the very heart of the interconnection, and so can dispense with the series of conditions external one to another, which lead up to the result, conditions which cool reflection has in succession to traverse, and in so doing feels the limits of its own individual externality, but such clairvoyance, just because it dims and turbid vision, but such clairvoyance, just because its dim and turbid vision does not present the facts in a rational interconnection, is for that very reason at the mercy of every private contingency of feeling and fancy and similar. Not to mention that foreign suggestions, see later, intrude into its vision. It is thus impossible to make out whether what the clairvoyants really see preponderates over what they deceive themselves in. But it is absurd to treat this visionary state as a sublime mental phase and as a truer state capable of conveying general truths. Note 123. Plato had a better idea of the relation of prophecy generally to the state of sober consciousness than many moderns, who supposed that the Platonic language on the subject of enthusiasm authorized their belief in the sublimity of the revelations of somnambulic or somnambulistic vision. Plato says in Timaeus, page 71, the author of our being so ordered our inferior parts that they too might obtain a measure of truth, and in the liver placed their oracle, the power of divination by dreams. And herein is a proof that God has given the art of divination, not to the wisdom, but to the foolishness of man. For no man, when in his wits, attains prophetic truth and inspiration. But when he receives the inspired word, but when he receives the inspired word, either his intelligence is enthralled by sleep, or he is demented by some distemper or possession, enthusiasm. Plato very correctly notes not merely the bodily conditions on which such visionary knowledge depends, and the possibility of the truth of the dreams, but also the inferiority of them to the reasonable frame of mind. End of note. Subsection Gamma. An essential feature of this sensitivity, with its absence of intelligent and volitional personality, is this, that it is a state of passivity, like that of the child in the womb. The patient in this condition is accordingly the patient in this condition is accordingly made and continues to be subject to the power of another person, the magnetizer, so that when the two are thus in psychical rapport, the selfless individual, not really a person, has for his subjective consciousness the consciousness of the other. This latter self possessed individual is thus the effective subjective soul of the former, and the genius which may even supply him with a train of ideas that the somnambulist perceives in himself, tastes and smells which are present in the person with whom he stands in rapport, and that he is aware of the other inner ideas and that he is aware of the other inner ideas and present perceptions of the latter as if they were his own, shows the substantial identity which the soul, which even in its concreteness is also truly immaterial, and that he is aware of the other inner ideas and present perceptions of the latter as if they were his own, shows the substantial identity which the soul, which even in its concreteness is also truly immaterial, is capable of holding with another. When the substance of both is thus made one, there is only one subjectivity of consciousness. The patient has a sort of individuality, but it is empty, not on the spot, not actual, and this nominal self accordingly derives its whole stock of ideas from the sensations and ideas of the other, in whom it sees, smells, tastes, reads, and hears. It is further to be noted on this point that the somnambulist is thus brought into rapport with two genii and a twofold set of ideas, his own and that of the magnetizer. But it is impossible to say precisely which sensation and which vision he, in this nominal perception, receives, beholds, and brings to knowledge from his own inward self, in which from the suggestions of the person with whom he stands in relation. This uncertainty may be the source of many deceptions, and accounts, among other things, for the diversity that inevitably shows itself among somnambulists from the different countries and under rapport with persons of different education as regards their views on morbid states and the methods of cure or medicines for them, as well as on scientific and intellectual topics. Subsection Epsilon. As in this sensitive substantiality there is no contrast to external objectivity, so within itself the subject is so entirely one that all varieties of sensation have disappeared, and hence when the activity of the sense organs is asleep, the common sense or general feeling specifies itself to several functions. One sees and hears with the fingers, and especially with the pits of the stomach and the like. To comprehend a thing means, in the language of practical intelligence, to be able to trace the series of means intervening between a phenomenon and some other existence on which it depends, to discover what is called the ordinary course of nature in compliance with the laws and relations of the intellect, ergo, causality, reason, and similar. The purely sensitive life, on the contrary, even when it retains that mere nominal consciousness, and in the morbid state alluded to, is just this form of immediacy, without any distinction between subjective and objective. Between intelligent personality and objective world, and without the aforementioned finite ties between them. Hence, to understand this intimate conjunction, which, though all embracing, is without any definite point of attachment, is impossible so long as we assume independent personalities, independent one of another, and of the objective world which is their content, so long as we assume the absolute spatial and material externality of one part of being to another. Beta, self feeling, sense of self, or selb, Selbstgefühl, Encyclopedia, subsection 407, alpha alpha. The sensitive totality is, in its capacity of individual, essentially the tendency to distinguish itself in itself and to wake up to the judgment in itself, in virtue of which it has particular feelings and stands as a subject in respect of these aspects of itself. The subjective, as such, gives these feelings a place of its own in itself. In these private and personal sensations, it is immersed, and at the same time, because of the ideality of the particulars, it combines itself in them with itself as a subjective unit. In this way, it is self feeling, and is so at the same time only in the particular feeling. Encyclopedia, subsection 408, beta beta. In consequence of the immediacy, which still marks the self feeling, in essence, in consequence of the element of corporality, which is still undetached from the mental life, and as the feeling too is itself particular and bound up with a special corporal form, it follows that although the subject has been brought to acquire intelligent consciousness, it is still susceptible of disease, so far as to remain fast in a special phase of its self feeling, unable to refine it to ideality and get the better of it. The fully furnished self of intelligent consciousness is a conscious subject. The fully furnished self of intelligent consciousness is a conscious subject, which is consistent in itself according to an order and behavior which follows from its individual position and its connection with the external world, which is no less a world of law. But when it is engrossed with a single phase of feeling, it fails to assign that phase its proper place and due subordination in the individual system of the world which a conscious subject is. In this way, the subject finds itself in contradiction between the total in this way, the subject finds itself in contradiction between the totality systematized in its consciousness and the single phase or fixed idea which is not reduced to its proper place and rank. This is insanity or mental derangement. In considering insanity, we must, as in other cases, anticipate the full grown and intelligent conscious subject, which is at the same time the natural self of self feeling. In such a phase, the self can be liable to the contradiction between its own free subjectivity and a particularity which, instead of being idealized in the former, remains as a fixed element in self feeling. Mind, as such, is free, and therefore not susceptible of this malady. But in older metaphysics, mind was treated as a soul, as a thing. And it is only as a thing, in essence, as something natural and existent, that it is liable to insanity, the settled fixture of some finite element in it. Insanity is therefore a psychical disease, in essence, a disease of body and mind alike. The commencement may appear to start from one more than other, and so also may the cure. The self possessed and healthy subject has an active and present consciousness of the ordered whole of his individual world, into the system of which he subsumes each special content of sensation, idea, desire, inclination, and such things, as it arises, so as to insert them in their proper place. He is the dominant genius over these particularities. Between this and insanity, the difference is like that between waking and dreaming, only that in insanity, the dream falls within the waking limits, and so makes part of the actual self feeling. Error and that sort of thing is a proposition consistently admitted to a place in the objective interconnection of things. In the concrete, however, it is often difficult to say where it begins to become derangement. A violent but groundless a violent but groundless and senseless outburst of hatred and such things may, in contrast to a presupposed higher self possession and stability of character, make its victim seem to be beside himself with frenzy. But the main point in derangement is the contradiction which a feeling with a fixed corporal embodiment sets up against the whole mass of adjustments forming the concrete consciousness, the mind which is in a condition of mere being, and where such being is not rendered fluid and its consciousness is diseased. The content which are set free is this reversion to mere nature, our self seeking affections of the heart, such as vanity, pride, and the rest of the passions, fancies, and hopes, merely personal love and hatred, When the influence of self-possession and of general principles, moral and theoretical, is relaxed and ceases to keep the natural temper under lock and key, the earthly elements are set free. That evil, which is always latent in the heart, because the heart as immediate is natural and selfish. It is the evil genius of man which gains the upper hand in insanity, but in distinction from and contrast to the better and more intelligent part which is there also. Hence, this state is mental derangement and distress. The right psychical treatment, therefore, keeps in view the truth that insanity is not an abstract loss of reason, neither in the point of intelligence nor of will and its responsibility, but only derangement, only a contradiction in a still subsisting reason. Just as physical disease is not an abstract, in essence, mere and total loss of health. If it were that, it would be death, but a contradiction in it, a contradiction in health. This humane treatment, no less this humane treatment, no less benevolent than reasonable, the services of pinnacle, towards which deserve the highest acknowledgement, presupposes the patient's rationality, and in that assumption has the sound basis for dealing with him on this side. Just as in the case of bodily disease, the physician bases his treatment on the vitality which, as such, still contains health. Gamma, habit, Gewohnheit, Gewohnheit. Encyclopedia, section 409. Self feeling, immersed in the detail of the feelings in simple sensations and also desires, instincts, passions, and their gratification, is undistinguished from them, but in the self there is latent a simple self relation of ideality, a nominal universality, which is the truth of these details, and as so universal, the self is to be stamped upon and made appear in this life of feeling, yet so as to distinguish itself from the particular details and be a realized universality. But this universality is not the full and stirring truth but this universality is not the full and sterling truth of the specific feelings and desires. What they specifically contain is as yet left out of account. And so, too, the particularity, as now regarded equally formal, it counts only as the particular being or immediacy of the soul in opposition, its equally formal and abstract realization. This particular being of the soul is the factor of its corporeity. Here we have its breaking with this corporeity, distinguishing it from itself a simple being, and becoming the ideal, subjective substantiality of it, just as in its latent notion, section 359, it was, Encyclopedia section 359, it was substance, and the mere substance of it. Again, this particular being of the soul is the factor of its corporeity. Here we have it breaking with this corporeity, distinguishing it from itself a simple being, and becoming the ideal, subjective substantiality of it, just as in its latent notion it was the substance and the mere substance of it. But this abstract realization of the soul in its corporal vehicle is not yet the self, not the existence of the universal, which is the universal. It is the corporeity reduced to its mere ideality. And so far only does corporeity belong to the soul as such, that is to say, as space and time, the abstract one outside another, as in short, empty space and empty time are only subjective form. pure act of intuition, so that pure being, which through the supersession in it of the particularity of the corporeity, or of the immediate corporeity as such has realized itself, is mere intuition and no more, lacking consciousness, but the basis of consciousness. As consciousness it becomes, when the corporeity of which it is the subjective substance, and which still continues to exist, and that as a barrier for it, has been absorbed by it, and it has been invested with the character of self-centered subject. Section Encyclopedia, section 410 is next up. And also, in the next recording, there will be a summary of what has gone before, including what we've read today. Worth the time.